Hello and welcome to the second lecture that I will be giving. This is Canuck Lectures. I'm Canuck because I'm from Canuck, and if these lectures help in some way to put my hometown on the map, then I'm more than happy with those. The subject of today's lecture is more a discussion amongst ourselves, and the topic is: are we raising generations of over emotional narcissists? Are we having a generation that simply does not understand the word no? Now, we all know, or I'm assuming so, that we know people who may fit the description. So what is over emotional? We know someone who, when they are told something they don't like, they can get very angry, they may scream and lash out. We also know people who, for whatever reason, have a big ego. They have to put on a front or a sort of image. There's a certain level there as to what is simply an expression of yourself, what is an image, and then when you take it too far. When you see this channel, obviously you see me, you see the suit, you see the amulet, you see my glasses, you see all this. This is, of course, yes, an image, but it is also me. It is not so much a front that is being put on. But back to the topic at hand, we know when denied something, a child will stomp, kick and scream. Looking at this modern generation, we seem to have replaced the traditional ways of raising with technological innovations. And what I mean by this is we're all too quick to put our children in front of the TV, or we're far too quick to hand them an iPhone and an iPad. We are seeing ever increasing younger people with iPads and with technological wizardry that sort of, to a certain extent, does it replace being a parent? Is it because of technology that we have a generation that is seemingly entitled? We see in the popular media quite recently the word snowflakes, and we see both sides of any political spectrum seem to espouse this notion. And it seems that in today's climate, to be dissed, to use the popular slang, is akin to suicide. We have Twitters, we have Facebook, we have the old MySpace. We have now a sort of global interconnected social media whereby anyone's thoughts can be textualized and encapsulated permanently in a text form. To what extent is it simply an expression of a person? And what extent does it become a sort of self-narcissism where you share everything sort of banal and mundane as your dinner? In the end, the question has to be asked, as to whether there has been an attitude now where we want something for less, which I think is a very greedy and entitled attitude. Personally, I think that this occurred roughly around the wartime generation going into the baby boomer generation. In the wartime generation, you had rationing. What you wanted, you did not get. You had to be given something, you got whatever you got, you ate whatever was on your plate. And that was that generation. You farmed yourself, Dig for Victory was a brilliant campaign during that era. And so it was very much you get what you put in. It was very much an idea of self-sufficiency, but to be grateful for what you had or what you could get. You didn't have fancy TVs, you didn't have anything like that. If you wanted entertainment, you spoke with your own community. And altogether it was a generation where you came to accept that you couldn't have it all. That you couldn't simply, as of convenience, grab the food you liked, or you couldn't just see the TV show you liked, or you couldn't. The essential idea is, if you've ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know that shelter, reproduction, food, these are all basic necessities that are attributed to the human animal. In the wartime generation, you didn't really have these to hand. So like my previous example, you couldn't just grab them. Nowadays, of course, you can. What I think happened was it started, and I'm not ascribing blame, but after the war and the restrictions were lifted, you saw a boom in population, hence baby boomer generation. And shortly thereafter, we entered the age of refrigeration, processed foods, we entered the era of the television, we entered an era that was different. So the baby boomer generation grew up having been born after the war. They grew up with the beginning of processed foods where they didn't have to cook, they could just simply grab it and it was there. They grew up with television as opposed to radio, and so you could just sit and watch whatever you wanted, in theory, although I still remember when there was just 4 channels. So there's that one. And what then happened was we saw in the 1960s the whole flower power movement, and we saw the stereotypical hippies, and we saw the stereotypical free love generation, because there was a baby boom, and having endured or heard of the endurance of the hardships of their parents, they came to be a sort of open giving, an open abundance of resources, whether it was physical love as in the flower power generation, or whether it was simply processed foods. We had obviously the housing boom, the market. I am regaled of tales of people that could buy houses for £3,000 back in the day, when you consider that housing prices are so different today. Then, after the baby boomers, you kind of had again a sort of switch. You had in the 80s, you had sort of like an economical generation of doing it for yourself. You had a rise in self-employment and businesses. With Thatcherism and Reaganomics, you had very much be your own businessman, be your own CEO, be your own yuppie. And we entered into an age where it became more about the individual and what the individual could do. It was not so much community spirit as in the Dig for Victory campaign and generation. It was more of, what can you do, what can you get? And then conveniences started to become even more sort of innovative. We have now cameras on cell phones, we can take selfies where previous generations couldn't. We can simply text, we can upload photos of ourselves and statuses. And the question is this: because of this, are we essentially raising a generation that does not actually understand the basic communications of being able to accept a different opinion and to be able to be unemotional when they hear that opinion? What we need, I think, in today's modern society is the understanding that if I disagree with you, I am both entitled, and I hate that word by the way, we are entitled to that view and to express that view, absolutely. But we must also understand that if I disagree with your notions, it is not a personal insult against you. I am not personally insulting you. I am not trying to diminish you in any way. I am simply disagreeing with the notion you have put forward. And I think today there is, much like when I said that to be dissed is the equivalent of social suicide, we are living in the so-called snowflake generation now. So, are we raising over-emotional narcissists? Is it all these conveniences, all this social media, all these things at the touch of a button? Are we raising people who are not taking care of themselves, who neglect themselves and their bodies and the social aspect of it as well as the community aspect? At what point do we become so disconnected, whilst connected, ironically, to the internet? At what point, essentially, are we becoming essentially like a machine ourselves, in that we are linked to everyone else through computer code and pre-generated algorithms, that we are neglecting the basic social skills? And I think with this video, what I would like ideally is, it is a very interesting subject and it's one that people have drawn upon. I'm not going to tarnish all of the modern generation, nor there's a mistake, neither would I tarnish the baby boomer generation or the wartime generation. I wouldn't tarnish my own. I think that on average, and I use the term on average, I think on average I think that would be my opinion, we are raising children and these generations, not perhaps through the fault of the parents, but just the environment itself, and all these things that we have to hand that we can grasp now. I think that we are, and I think this is a debate that won't go away, to be honest. But nevertheless, it's one that is interesting, definitely. And that's been me, and I'd like to see your comments if possible. So that's that, and I'll see you next time.